In this session, however, we are going to focus on securing long-term prosperity for the Baltic Sea region by means of circular economy. And this actually is pretty much the welcoming speech from the Deputy Director General, DG Regio, Mr. Normundus Popens. And it's great to have him here, and please just make sure that we welcome him.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm really, really happy to be here in Gdańsk, in this beautiful city, and to participate in this annual forum for the Baltic Sea strategy. I, without any doubt, will say that this is the most important macro-regional strategy we have. And it's not because I come from Latvia, and it's not because I was ambassador and I was actually at the birth of this strategy. Not because of that. It's because this strategy was the first one which actually tried to put forward the functional area approach at the macro-regional level. It was quite an innovative idea at that time, and I remember in the council we had quite hard times actually to get the conclusions to establish this strategy. I will not name and shame the countries who were against it, but I have to say that we had rather live debates. And now, after 10 years, I think we all can confirm that this was worth doing it. I come from the DG, which, loves place-based approach. We do have thematic policies in the EU, they are extremely important, but we do believe that in order to deliver results under these very important policies, we always have to remember that delivery of these policies takes place with concrete people in concrete territories. And I think this is something which we have to remind to everyone. And in this context, to me, the macro-regional strategies, and first of all, the Baltic Sea strategy, is exactly the example how we can cooperate on very important but specific prioritized issues which are a common denominator for more than one member state and more than one region. Now, in the new period, in the new legislation, we are trying to do it also for the member states through the policy objective 5 in mainstream programs. And I already hear that it will be very difficult to implement because of the governance issues. And this is, I think, something where we should look at macro-regional strategies and see how you manage to govern these strategies with very concrete objectives and priorities and achieve something, because governance is sometimes also a key obstacle. I hope it will not be the case for the policy objective 5, but all I want to say is that today's topic, circular economy, is extremely important. Well, the Baltic Sea strategy was established because the Baltic Sea was a dirty sea in terms of, pollution. And it needed all to be on board. And this is exactly the point when we talk about macro-regional strategies and functional areas. Everybody has to be on board, because if one territory, one member state or one region falls out, the result will not be as good as it can be. Now, circular economy is a concept which was adopted by EU communication, I think in 2015 already. So we already looked at it seriously and still are looking at this programming period, how to support it from structural funds. But I think it has a future. And not only because it deals with recycling, with improving environmental conditions, but I think also because it offers new opportunities. It should be seen as an opportunity to develop something new technologies, innovation, to develop new enterprises, and actually to improve lives of citizens, which is our main goal. So I think the circular economy topic will be one of the key priorities also for our funds to support. As you know, we are at the stage, and when I speak, everybody laughs because I say now it's a very important time period for our funds. It's always like that. Today it truly is. I just came back from Madrid, and we have now launched all 27 informal dialogues on the future programming period, on future programs from structural funds, from cohesion funds. And we tried to implement two principles when we are now launching these programs and discussing our regulatory framework. It's continuity and simplification. We want to continue with the current measures which work well. And so, for example, management and control systems can be carried over without any accreditation in future period if they work well. But we also want to push further everybody to simplify, to use more simplified cost options, more result-based schemes, to look at really gold plating, not to create unnecessary bureaucracy. But all this can be done only in cooperation. Obviously, for Baltic Sea strategy and other macro-regional strategies, what is very important is also that we would like to see our mainstream programs supporting transnational projects, transregional projects. We tried already to put, we call it hooks in our programming, so that the member states and regions, which are managing authorities for our mainstream programs, can develop project selection criteria so that they can prioritize interregional projects. Well, in some fields it's inevitable because, as I said, environment and transport, for example, you have to have connections, otherwise it just doesn't work. But in other fields it's not so obvious. So we don't really, we have some examples, but we don't have that many examples, or as many examples as we would like to see. And here I'm not talking about macro-regional strategy becoming a new screen, a new criteria. Macro-regional strategy, if it sets very concrete objectives in concrete fields, actually just makes sense to us. We cannot achieve good results in isolation or living in silos. When we started to work on smart specialization strategies, we quickly realized that it's a bottom-up approach. So regions and member states had to develop and define their advantages and build on them. But then you quickly realize that if it's only that, it's not going to work. Well, it's going to get some funding from us, but further than that, sustainability and results will not be there. So this is why we started to push for this peer-to-peer review, to use different platforms where we compare what we have in different regions. We have also now established, I think it's 13 or 11, interregional partnerships, which look at different policy fields, batteries, 3D, whatever. It's very good, and we want to build on that. We want to encourage everybody in Europe to cooperate more. And I think cooperation will be one of the key words for the next programming period. It's not just that under Policy Objective 5, we want to encourage and help member states and regions to establish functional territories to make sure that everybody gets the basic services, but not necessarily by the cost of every school in every village. I will be very honest. People need to have access to education and health, and it's extremely important, but we have to do it in a smart way if we want to sustain. We also have to go further with smart specialization strategies. It's not just about defining advantages and good ideas. It is about really funding things that are missing in Europe. This is, transfer of technologies, new technologies, supporting development of new value chains, supporting our small and medium-sized enterprises, which are at the backbone of our economy in Europe. So we will work with all member states. As I said, we have just launched the dialogues, and we will work to make sure that this interregional part is developed in our mainstream programs. Let's see what happens. I hope you will support us on that, because we really need very good cooperation with all stakeholders. And I hope you, because you are working within the macro-regional strategy, the Baltic Sea strategy, you will be our partners when we negotiate with managing authorities, like finance ministries in some countries and so on and so forth, to show that this macro-regional approach really has value added and simply makes sense. And now a few words about our territorial cooperation programs. We also are launching our inputs into the future of so-called territorial cooperation programs. And you know that our approach has been very clear. If we have a program, if we have a macro-regional strategy, we must have a transnational program which supports this strategy, because the principle is exactly the same. Transnational programs which are funded and implemented in shared management follow the same principle, the same approach. And this is why already in current period, we have 4 transnational programs which are to a certain extent aligned with also macro-regional strategies and their priorities. Now in future we want to make a full alignment with these strategies and obviously also make some efficiency gains. I don't know if we will be allowed to do that because we are still currently negotiating current regulatory framework. And I was really attacked by people from the Baltic Sea region when I was in Madeira last year about trying to kill cross-border and maritime. Well, it's not really true. We want to support cooperation around the sea basins even more. But all we want to make sure that there is certain rationale and certain scope and actually more flexibility and more opportunities for very small cross-border programs which exist now. So in our idea, the Baltic Sea should have one important transnational program with clearly identified bilateral strands and priorities. And I think also from the simplification point of view, we would find the ways how to easier manage that. Well, I know it's blinking already, so I have to stop. I just wanted to say that we will come to negotiations on our transnational programs later this year. So you will receive our input paper also on the Baltic Sea transnational program. To me, this is very much linked to the strategy, and this is why I also would encourage you to work further on your action plans, on trying to prioritize them even more, because then we can also see what can we do in order to support this strategy further from our programs. But certainly, as such, we value highly your work. We value very highly macro-regional strategies, and particularly the Baltic Sea strategy. And we will keep working with you on making it even better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poppens. Mr. Poppens, and since you are one of the speakers of the discussion panel, you're already invited to take a seat. That would be really nice. So, an applause for our first guest. We will be joined by the Project Director Circular Economy from Citra, Mr. Kari Herlevi. From VTT Technical Research Center of Finland, Mr. Petr Hradil. The Secretary of State, Ministry of Entrepreneurship and Technology of Poland, Mr. Marcin Ociepa. And the President of the Board of the United Nations Global Compact Network, Poland, Mr. Kamil Wyszkowski. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for taking our invitation. It really means a lot. It is this special moment when we can talk about how the circular economy can actually lead some positive change in the region, and if it's actually feasible. First, I wanted to let our audience know that you're kindly invited to take part in the discussion, not just with the questions that you may have when I give the microphone to you, which I sure will do, but also with the app. So anybody who's taking a picture right now can also download an app, and also those of you who just don't have the cell phone in their hands yet can also do that. The name of the app is EU-SBSR, and it really makes sense because if you go to the app, there's going to be the agenda menu, and you're gonna have the opportunity to ask a question. So you just can find that. So what do? Is in the agenda, you find the first plenary session, and you click on the feature, ask a question. And our speakers are free to have water, but also a microphone if you would like that. Most of you have these special microphones, and some of you have handheld microphones. Also, I would like to let you know that this is the moment for your interaction. I wanted to thank the speakers for taking the invitation, but also I would like to encourage us to do our best to make it very informative and very dynamic. First of all, I'd like to ask you, all of you actually, about the main question of today. So actually, if going circular is really the way forward for the Baltic Sea region, and if you think it's feasible, it's achievable. Tell me, please.
Me first. Okay. So let me remind that we had this type of dialogue in Katowice last year, and frankly speaking, Baltic Sea is the first, potentially the first sea, the first region where we could achieve zero plastic pollution in relatively soon, simply in 10 to 15 years. It's potentially possible.
Why do you think that would be the sea which is the easiest one when it comes to achieving this goal?
Because of the countries around. So all that countries are more or less responsible. They simply trying to protect the environment. They have a public policies integrated. Most of them are the member of European Union, which is, as we recently heard from colleague from European Commission, are part of EU strategy dedicated to the Baltic Sea. So from that perspective, this chance is real. And coming back to the climate summit and the follow-up discussion. Last year, yes, but this year we have very important meeting in New York, SDG summit focused on climate change. By the way, Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, announced that as the, in fact, preparatory meeting before the climate summit in Chile, December this year. So 23rd of September, we are planning to discuss circular economy as the most important strategic priority for that debate on climate change in the context of SDG implementation mechanism and indicators behind. So from that perspective, it's more than important for UN system as a whole.
So what you're saying is that it doesn't only have to do with the Baltic Sea region, but it's also going to be acknowledged by more regions and more countries.
Baltic Sea could be simply an example, a case study, that it's simply possible when we are able
and maybe a beacon.
Yeah, that's a plan. We desperately need this type of cases, success stories.
Yeah, we really crave that, success stories. By the way, I would like to let our audience know that if you use the hashtag, just like Anasita Klonova has, hashtag EUSBSR, your opinion will also be visible on the screen. So as Mr. Wyszkowski has been saying, more and more countries can be interested in it. And also we have a very good advantageous situation here because all of the countries are interested in helping the Baltic Sea and not littering anymore, hopefully. So my question would be to Mr. Deputy Director General from DG Regio. Mr. Poppens, tell me please, do you really see that? So would you say that because the countries want the best for the sea, we might be the first sea to be litter-free or plastic-free?
Yes, of course. Well, I do hope so. It's not just the fact that every member state cooperates now. It's the fact that there is a great history in the Baltic Sea cooperation, and particularly on environmental issues. I think HELCOM is the first organization which was created in the CBSS and so on and so forth. So there is a history which has led to good results. Because as I said in the beginning, if we look 20 years back at the Baltic Sea, that was one of the most polluted, I think, sea basins in Europe, definitely. And things have changed, and countries have improved, their wastewater or solid waste recycling. And also, obviously, also agriculture and industry, the one that has died in some countries has been replaced by much more modern businesses. And I think because of this cooperation, the history and results, and I think on the forum page, you can see concrete examples how circular economy can be put forward with concrete things. Because for us, it's a beautiful concept. It definitely has future. And as I said, it can also create, opportunities. It's not just about recycling, but it is also about knowledge sharing and showing how to do that concretely on the ground. And I think this is also where, the Baltic Sea strategy, hopefully also by the help of our programs, can show to others what can be done around the sea basin to actually implement this circular economy concept.
Mr. Poppens just said that it is a wonderful concept. What do you think, Mr. Herlevi, we could do so that it doesn't remain only a concept that would be great, but maybe sometimes not working in practice? What should be some steps?
It's a very good question. I think you need to have at least 3 types of actions. Obviously, European Union level kind of action plan is a great framework for each country to kind of develop their own actions and strategies. And definitely it has to be more than strategy. It has to be an action plan and so concrete evidence, the benefits for the whole society. And that is really important part of the thing. Secondly, of course, as it's an economy, circular economy, it has to have a strong business case, not only for private sector, but also kind of in a broader context for the whole economy. And there you need to have different kind of tools to support the idea to take it in practice, which means that companies most of the time need different kind of tools to kind of implement. And obviously you need to have the support of innovation policies and subsidies as such.
So you would also be in support of taxation that would help the green companies?
Taxation is really important, especially if you look it from the ecological point of view, that you tax less labor and more the economic environmental harm that is happening in the society. So, for example, in the Finnish new government's plan, that is one of the key areas.
In Finland?
Yes.
So the plan is to make it easier for the ecologically savvy companies, to make it easier for them to do business?
Absolutely. And also the whole society, so that it really works, not in a linear but more circular fashion.
I would like to ask Mr. Hradil, thank you very much, about the way that the scientists look at it. Do they think that it's an easy task, or do you think that we have a lot of ideas but really putting them into action is a challenge?
This is exciting for us, of course, because the whole economy is going to be transformed, which means that there is a big need for innovations everywhere. Scientists are really eager because in everything that we do, we have to look into the future. And if we don't see that there is a future for this, then we have to take some action. So we were really prepared to do something, but we are very grateful that there is a clear communication of what are the goals from the Paris Agreement until like EU strategies, Baltic, Nordic, national strategies. So we are now very happy that we are in a kind of predictable environment and we can start rebuilding our own infrastructure as researchers. And we take it as a circular economy to be a horizontal approach in everything that we do.
And when you speak of the infrastructure, I guess the ways to transform it could be both public and private. It could be maybe public and private procurement.
Yeah.
Or partnership.
Yeah, I was myself very much surprised that we have a lot of actually pressure from private sector, and I think this is very good in the scope of Baltic Sea region, because the companies that we are talking with, they are operating in many, or some are operating in all of the states around the Baltic Sea, and I think this is very important. So the actions they're taking, it's.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to ask you about the Polish view on this. Do you think that private businesses could actually be the ones in this part of the Baltic Sea leading the change? Do you see that already between entrepreneurs or among entrepreneurs?
I think this is not only about business, but we should start with ordinary people. It's all about awareness of our citizens. We should remember that people are not only consumers, but also voters and taxpayers. If we will work with people, if we encourage them to be more sensitive for issues like circular economy and our common Baltic Sea, they will be more active when it comes to encourage their politics, their governments to do much more on this field.
So
And
would awareness rising be on the Polish government agenda?
yeah, I think yes. I think yes, because everyone see that climate is changing, and I don't want to talk only about the today temperature today in Poland, but everyone see that the world is changing, but this is the role of politics, this is the role of European Union, this is a role of non-governmental organizations to help people to be more ambitious when it comes to the circular economy. And but you ask about our government, we prepare a Polish roadmap towards the circular economy transformation. And next week, I hope that Polish government will adopt this roadmap. And this is a key document for us because we create this document together with other ministers, and this is the key for success.
Mr. Herlevi, do you see this as a major development, that the road map is established?
Yes, I certainly see it as a vital part of the kind of giving the strong vision where to go so that the industries and different part of the civil society can innovate and go forward with that kind of vision.
I think it might have been you who suggested that we need an action plan. Would you say that, and this would also be a question to Mr. Poppens, that maybe the previous action plan was a little bit too general, too open-ended?
I don't know. I think it was a good action plan, but okay, you can always streamline. And it's true that also for the implementation of funds, we now currently have 11 thematic objectives. In future, we will have 5 policy objectives. But I will not pretend that under policy objective 1 and 2, we have merged a lot of, former objectives. So it depends really what you want to achieve, I think. If you need more actions in action plan, you have to do it. But prioritizing is extremely important because sequential investment and prioritization always leads to better results than just chaotic, funding here and there. But one thing which I want to stress from previous speakers is that obviously I want to talk about social inclusion and partnership. Any policy, and we have sometimes a tendency to go for really great goals, but we should never forget that social inclusion and measures to work on all-inclusive implementation of policies is absolutely important. Because I do believe in this European model of economy, and I do believe that this is also, not everything is up to the Commission and the European Union level. This is a responsibility of different levels of governance, depending on how the member states are set up. But it's extremely important to really look how we ensure that this is really happening. I was shocked when I opened the semester. Okay, I will not tell you which country, but you guessed what I'm talking about. When everybody wants to be smart now, smart specialization, circular economy, this,
Smart
and
cities.
then there's an opposition, smart or inclusive. This is completely wrong. Smart means also inclusive. Smart means that you also work with marginalized groups, vulnerable groups, with different parts of society to make sure that everybody is involved. So our plan for the future programming period is to really push much more also on the principles like Charter of Fundamental Rights, accessibility, and equality, non-discrimination, because I think there's work to be done. And this is where I do believe that all stakeholders can get involved quite usefully.
What would you say would be the number one step, a very practical step that you could do to have more inclusion?
No, apart from funding from social fund, and we do also some, but social fund does fund a lot of measures within member states to make sure that vulnerable groups are involved, that they have access to schools, to healthcare, they have access to labor market. But it's not just that. It's also the fact when we put in the EU money into the projects, if we build infrastructure, and if somebody tells me we just have new infrastructure from ERDF and it's non-accessible for handicapped people, it's impossible. It cannot be like this. So this is why I'm saying it's not just about funding and helping these groups, it's also making sure that these principles are observed and implemented all across the EU funds. And particularly, I'm talking obviously about infrastructure investment, but also about other types of investment that we do from ERDF. I had an accident and I had to go with crutches even in our commission building. To get into Balliol building, unless you are visibly put on a platform, taken up by 2 guards when all DG watches you. All I'm saying is, I think the commission also, and luckily we will move out from these buildings, when we reconstruct or build new infrastructure or new urban spaces, I think the 2 parts, inclusion and security. And these are, to me, the 2 topics which we need to bring in more and more. We also work on the EU Urban Agenda. I don't know if you heard, it's a big thing. It's a new level of governance because Commission works with member states in intergovernmental setup with cities and stakeholders. We do have a partnership on circular economy, which will produce an action plan. And I hope that there will be tasks for everybody, not just for the Commission. We will follow up, but I think it's really important to discuss and to divide tasks because there are different parts that can be done at different levels of governance.
So infrastructure, very important, and you have this personal touch on it when the reality kicked in and you have that health issue. I wonder, you say about, you refer to the cooperation of all the states, and I feel like this, Mr. Wyszkowski, would maybe be a little bit of a challenge because obviously there is a different level of dealing with ecology when it comes to countries like the Baltic countries or Poland, and especially if you compare it to Denmark or to some other countries of Scandinavia, maybe. So like I wonder if we would have this level playing field, but we probably don't have. We have a different starting point.
True, but that's why we so desperately need a framework and also a platform for discussion. And I joined UN in 2001, so 18 years now with this very complex, wonderful organizations. I definitely love Mondays. And what I have to state here in front of you that the most fascinating period of my time, that was 2 years in New York when I was responsible for preparation of topics for General Assembly. So 194 different interests. And we have to somehow build a framework simply to build the first dialogue, a later consensus, and finally some compromise. And that's fascinating. So when we are observing a micro scale, let's put it that way, Baltic Sea regions, when we are comparing to the climate process or to the General Assembly, definitely a regional strategy for Baltic is a micro process. Yes? So it's simply regional perspective. But to agree framework, like a framework which we agreed during COP24 in Katowice, it's simply needed for all the states which are obliged to implement this international agreement. And what is even more important, every single year, UN is organizing, let's say, global conclave, where all the states are coming to simply to discuss and achieve some next targets, next steps. Why I'm saying that? Because for future COP25 in Chile, a framework agreed in Katowice is the most important platform for next decisions. In addition to that, we have all the financial mechanisms, starting from UN public procurement, from funding from World Bank Group, also other development banks for actions like for the Baltic Sea. Simply, we are defining the climate policy as UN. European Union is following and fortunately is integrating what UN is proposing. For that purpose, European Union is defining structural funds to implement properly EU Baltic Sea strategy, and that's a great example that we have such a wonderful organism called European Union, because it's simply wonderful that we have it here, and we are able to integrate all the efforts based on European Union policies, European acquis communautaire, etc. And finally, even if we have in the government this or that, some people, even ministers, which don't believe in climate change, fortunately, they agree, or presidents sometimes, they agree SDG platform as a 17 goals to implement, and they agree climate agreement as the global agenda for change. And that's our sphere of hope, let's put it that way, because climate crisis is real and simply is so depressing, especially that you are reading IPCC special report on global warming and the other UN reports on that regard. We are all depressed in UN. And we are really trying to encourage states and, of course, decision makers to take these risks seriously. And examples like Baltic Sea strategy are crucial for us to encourage others to do similar approach. That's why this level, the global level and the regional level, is so important for us from that global discussion.
I'd like to come back to the 3 years that you say you spent in New York and you really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
2 years. You said it was so much fun to prepare these meetings of 194 countries. Did you see that actual conclusions were reachable there? And did you see that these meetings were fruitful, or did you see that there were too many parties? And because of that, a conclusion was actually not reachable?
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes we are facing the situation where it's simply impossible to agree any compromise, but we are still trying. That's our role. Yeah? So we are simply still trying. That's why we have COP25.
Yeah.
So 25 years we are discussing, but fortunately we are able to achieve some results, and this dialogue is happening. That's, I think, positive news.
And it really gives us a lot of hope, because if we hear that a compromise is achievable at such an international level, then it should be all the easier to achieve with just 8 or 10 states. I wonder, Mr. Petr Hradil, how you see our countries, the 8 or even 10 countries being able to compromise?
Yeah, well, this is a difficult question. I think that it's possible to compromise, but as was stated, we are in maybe different starting points in some areas, and then the crucial point is to share the knowledge, to show the good experiences. And I think that the compromise can be built from implementing the circular economy from bottom to up, starting with a coffee cup and going to households, cities, and then observing what the others are doing. So then we will reach some level of understanding. So now we are probably, when I was reading the report that was released before this forum, now we are at the level of cities. So this is already very good, actually. So we are going the right way, and I think that would be a common level within this framework.
So you say that the future looks bright because the countries talk to each other?
Yeah. They talk to each other, they collect good examples, share good examples, and they're trying to find a way not only of a circular innovations, but also on a systemic innovations, to make the economy run, because circular economy is two words, circular and economy, and then the other part is a little bit tricky. We have a lot of legislation problems and market problems, but we are trying.
You probably mean that economy is, after all, going for profits, and you would like the circular to always really provide you with profit. And I guess some companies would be like, hey, but we just really want to make sure that our shareholders have a lot of income, and we don't care that much. I feel as though it's not just for individuals to be interested in all that they can do on their daily basis, but maybe also addressed at companies and trying to change their attitude.
Yeah, but companies are run by people.
It's still...
I mean, we have to do the innovation in our minds first I think the same attitude while you are going to shop and not taking plastic bag is now seen on a bigger scale, just because of the same people.
I think that the fact that the United Nations also have a similar goal and that there will be more meetings devoted to this topic, and COP25 will also make sure that everybody in here is more and more aware of the problem and that more changes will follow. I would like to talk about the digitalization. We see more and more services of shared economy, and maybe this is also a way to go.
Can I show one example
Sure.
on that regard? Because yesterday we had, again, discussion in Warsaw as a part of Warsaw Humanitarian Expo. And together with Polish Minister Kwieciński, responsible for development, our role was to invite 60 CEOs from state-owned companies and global brands like IKEA, BASF, etc. During that debate, we discussed exactly that point: how to use digitalization, innovation, and how to learn from global branches, which simply knows and invent a lot, various technologies, products, etc., and how to integrate with megatrends, Polish, especially big companies which are less active at the global level. That's exactly for what is UN Global Compact as a global UN platform for cooperation with private sector, the place where I'm working now. The dialogue was wonderful because suddenly in the same room we have CEOs which perfectly knows why megatrends related to climate change, which are called green economy, it's a must-have for business strategy. On the other side, we have Polish state-owned companies which simply realize, oh my God, we didn't know almost anything about that. So maybe it's the last moment to jump in. Behind, we had this wonderful dialogue about climate migration, because that was a part of Humanitarian Expo. Simply people in need, which simply they need to move from point A to point B because it's too hot, because they are facing water crisis, or simply they are hunger. And we have companies which simply starting to realize that the process is going simply intensifying rapidly. It was wonderful because we simply realized that this type of discussions in Poland are so useful and so needed to simply integrate all the efforts. Year before, with Minister Emilewicz, we presented in New York Polish report on SDG implementation. And again, Ms. Emilewicz, as a Polish minister, she presented what Poland achieved already. And of course, that report shows some, let's say, first step forward with various areas.
Yeah,
but
it's not
again,
complete.
But again, Polish report was defined as one of the most ambitious. That's interesting. Simply Poland as a representative of the Central Europe, encouraging the other states, let's say, around, that it's simply possible to have so ambitious goals, even if Poland is so often criticized as a country based on coal. Yeah? Mm-hmm. It's also good to remember that some difficult, painful decisions are simply needed to fully implement what we are trying to achieve as a part of this climate change process.
That is right. Maybe the Secretary of State could tell us a little bit more about the ambitious goals. Like we hear that the government is ambitious, and maybe just an example of what could happen or change in the future.
We choose 4 priorities for our roadmap to circular economy. For Polish economy, is sustainable production, sustainable consumption, bioeconomy, and new business models. And I'm optimistic because when we talk about circular economy, we are talking about challenge for whole Europe, for whole, of course, Polish economy, but also for whole Europe. So going back to the Baltic Sea, this can be a great, like you say, success story, great example for whole world, because Baltic Sea is big enough to make impact, but small enough to create a real community of nations, of stakeholders, also of entrepreneurs. You mentioned entrepreneurs, and we work every day with them, and I'm convinced that they can be in the front line of the changes, because all smart managers understand that they should be the part of the community. The companies should be the part of the community. If we create community around the Baltic Sea, around the circular economy, the business will be there.
Working at the Ministry of Entrepreneurship, do you see some companies that actually implement the new business models that you have talked about? Maybe digitalization is one of those directions.
Yeah, of course. Digitalization, this is another example. Yeah? This is a challenge for our economy, but this is also a challenge in the Baltic Sea area. And we have two groups of companies. The biggest one, with many departments following the new trends, and very active with a lot of funds. But what is very important, even more and more SMEs looking for niche, looking for smart specialization, and it's, I think, separate goal for us to encourage them to be the part of this process also in this Baltic Sea challenge for us.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could maybe think of some changes that are happening in your countries, maybe some businesses that actually change the game, kind of, so that this actually is digitalization in its best form. I'm just trying to kind of encourage you to think about it, but I feel like anyway, Mr. Wyszkowski would like to add something.
Yeah, because maybe not digitalization, but that also sustainable finance, because that's the most fascinating topic behind. Private sector, together with public funds, acting well, if we will start to think about all the investments which we are calling in UN as a carbon neutral. So that's the mega trend. We really like to also show to others what kind of investments are simply defined by us as environmentally positive. Yeah. So from that point of view, after the Paris Agreement, first the World Bank Group and later all the international banks decided to stop financing simply investments which simply has bad impact for the environment. So we have such a huge banks like ING, Santander, Deutsche Bank, and of course the World Bank Group. And the number of banks are growing. During the climate...
So they no longer try to invest in projects that are just linear.
Exactly. What that means, that if anyone is planning to build or simply organize, fund an investment which is very badly polluted, very badly potentially simply polluted for the environment, the financial mechanism behind simply to collect the money is very difficult now. So they have to find a bank which is not in that prestigious group. It's more and more difficult, and that's the biggest achievement after the climate agreement. Even more important than digitalization, because here we have indeed very good progress, and we can even show that the list of the banks which signed that policy together with UN system, and simply if anyone is planning to build a coal mine, it is not as easy as it was 5-6 years before.
That is good, because that's kind of a natural way to stop the less ecological projects from happening, or at least kind of promoting the ones that have our nature in mind. And I've seen that Mr. Poppins wanted to add something.
Well, you asked for examples, and here I will speak in totally personal capacity. It has nothing to do with funds or our programs. My daughter, when she was searching for a job in Latvia, she found a job. She worked for 1 year in an SME, which employed about 20 people. And you know, the guy, some 5 years ago, had an idea. He somehow saw that in the United States, the housewives don't know how to use iPhone to make photographies. So he started to test it, and you know, after 5 years, it was 1 year, 2 years ago, he had this SME in Latvia, paid taxes in Latvia, 20 people employed, working everybody in Latvia with high-tech computers and technology, selling all their products in the United States. They had very good, extremely good salaries for Latvia, no representative in the United States, and the guy is, I think, a millionaire already. Okay? This is what digitalization means, basically. It gives you an opportunity, because we are so now, you know, in terms of technologies, we don't have to go to United States. I don't know how he got this idea about housewives and iPhone photographies, but they are the biggest seller of training programs in the United States. Can you imagine that? You know, a few years ago, it wasn't impossible because, you know, the products, you know, they are not very simple. You cannot send them through Yahoo box, okay? And they have to monitor, you know, and they do top-ups and these stupid things, you know, when they improve the program every second day, basically, and change everything. I'm not talking about that. All I'm saying is digitalization is a must. And this is why we have Digital Europe as our big policy objective, because it gives you enormous opportunities if you have in place access to these technologies and also to basic services infrastructure. But how far we go, I don't know. Now we talk about artificial intelligence. It's very good, it reminds me of the Matrix movies. But I say no more, because it, you know, it could be that this is a new priority for the EU, artificial intelligence. It does sound interesting, but I don't know yet exactly what it means. And whether, you know.
And when you read the report prepared by Politica Insight, they write about how we sometimes maybe give too much hope into technology to save the problems of the environment. Because we're kind of thinking like, oh, but in the future they're going to figure out something that will kind of save the planet. And so obviously there's pros and cons of digitalization, I guess. Tell me, please.
Yes, in a way, I really agree. Digitalization, some say, is like new oil, but it doesn't run out, which is, I guess, the positive note of that. But many times people don't also think about the emissions of digitalization, and that could even bypass aviation in coming years. So we have to be very careful when we are planning these systems that they are well managed, and also the emissions have been taken care of. And there are, of course, many good examples also in Finland from digitalization point of view as well, from the small and medium-sized to larger corporations.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, on that note, I'd like to mention an example which is not exactly connected to the topic, but it's interesting to know that the famous and ever-growing cryptocurrencies, to create a Bitcoin, it takes more and more processor power. And so you need a lot of computers warming up very highly and taking a lot of energy to actually start working. And I've read that the whole computers that work on creating Bitcoins, they use as much energy as Mexico, the country of Mexico. So that's another side of the coin, maybe. And I didn't mean to make you feel sad in this moment, but I feel like we all started to feel sad, and I don't know what to do. So this really is, as always in life, that there's advantages and disadvantages to anything that's happening. But I feel like the example that Mr. Poppens used is a good one, because the inventive guy didn't even have to travel to the US to actually start the app. And maybe some 10 or 20 years ago, he would have to travel a lot.
He does go to the US once a year to check out.
Yeah. And if you want to say something, then make sure to take the mic, but it's okay.
It was a joke, I think. Otherwise, we would have a digital forum today, and you have a three-dimensional Mr. Poppens talking, no? But you can't trust always a virtual reality, okay? So he does travel once a year to United States to take a look himself, you know, what's happening there, just to be sure that his videos are really the right ones. So
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, dear speakers, I'd like to ask a very simple question. How do you think that the circular economy approach could change the Baltic Sea region? Like, do you see some great optimistic future in the next 10, 20 years? And what would the changes be if we really adopt the circular economy? Now, that's a question. Yeah, and Mr. Poppins is just suggesting that I should ask the audience. That is nice, and I will sure do that. And so if you, dear audience, have any questions or would like to share your opinion, that would be really nice. So I'm just trying to give you this feeling that you're welcome, and also I hear that we have some questions from the app, and so from these questions, dear speakers, you will not be able to run away. And I wonder what the questions are. We actually will be able to see them very soon.
Okay, so maybe I will start. Maybe I'm not
Oh,
from
you
the
want to
audience,
start
but
before
to rescue.
That's okay. Thank you.
So because that question was very philosophical.
It was, if it
But
can change.
of course, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But let me precise why I'm also thinking that the Baltic Sea could be a great example if we properly implement circular economy around the state, in all the states around the Baltic Sea, because we have the biggest problem for the Baltic Sea, which is called eutrophization.
Yeah, up to 97% of the sea.
So the Baltic Sea is a desperate need, and for the economies of all the countries around, that means that if we will do nothing, income from tourists, from fishery, etc., will go down. So that means that GDP for
Will
all this
also
country goes
decrease.
down also. And that's an argument, especially for climate change skeptics, that it's simply good to do something. And one of the best reports about various risks in the Baltic Seas is a HELCOM report, again produced by a European Commission. The lady from Poland is the head of HELCOM, so that's also good to mention. And that report not only defining eutrophization as a problematic sphere, but also chemical weapon from the Second World War.
Yeah, there's still some on.
It's also good to remember that we still have all these things in the Baltic Sea. Plus, of course, the other risks, which I mentioned before, like plastic pollution.
So if we speak of eutrophication, I guess we would have to mention agriculture, which is quite a source of all what's really flowing into the sea, and many times the artificial substances that they use also have some influence over that. There can be phosphorus, so that's maybe another. I don't know if it's about an information campaign or if it's about some actually decisive policies and maybe some new laws being taken. Help me please with that, Kari Herlevi.
Well, yes, that's true. I think the plastics debate in the last couple of years has really shown that there's will also for stricter regulations and even banning of some of the single-use plastics in Europe. So it shows that when it's a real danger for health or environment, there is will to kind of push these forward. And I think it's already also needed to some extent. Of course, you need to have room for innovation as well. So it's not always about regulation, but certainly it's a play between these balances of innovation and kind of regulation.
And also many times in the moments of economic turndown, you would see countries stemming away from ecology because they would only care about making sure that the economy is fine. We really have the questions, so we appreciate that. One of them is, what do you do in your daily lives to support a sustainable circular economy? So that's about the examples. I mentioned how I bike a lot to my grandma and back, and promise not just that, but I want to hear from you. What do you do to be more sustainable, more circular yourself?
I'm vegetarian.
Yeah, well, that's appreciated.
It was not easy, believe me, because I love meat, but simply I decided to stop, knowing how it's important, global mass meat production, how huge negative effect it has for the climate and for the environment. So that's the first thing. The second, sustainable transport, and of course we are encouraging all the cities in Poland to fully integrate UN strategy for sustainable transport, which is also integrated with smart city focus or policy. So bicycle roads for everyone, transport. And public transport, of course. And I always have funny discussions with some people which are saying that in Poland it's impossible to go by bicycle from one point in Warsaw to B because it's too cold, it's rainy, it's snow, etc. We have air pollution, etc. And when I'm comparing with Copenhagen, where we have 34 people using bicycle every day, 24 by car, and the rest using public transport, and they have more days with snow, rain, and wind.
Exactly. You wouldn't really say that they have a better climate.
They are simply very surprised. Huh? So maybe we Poles, we are too lazy and too car-oriented, and that's why we need education. That's why we need to change the habits.
I agree. I have a friend who happens to be a sailor, and when I tell him that I bike all year long, he tells me, "You're right, because there's no bad weather. There's only improper clothing." So all that really matters is the way you're clothed, and you can really make that happen. But there's also some social stigma attached to it. Like there's sometimes still easier to tell everyone that you're late because there was a lot of traffic jam and your car was among many. But it's a little bit harder to say that your bike just had an issue with the tire, and so because it doesn't sound like you're this professional person if you just commute by bike. I don't know, maybe it just has to do with our mindset. Mr. Poppins.
I'm sorry, I'm in a very good mood today, but have you seen the series called The Good Place? It's on Netflix, by the way. It has a part where, because the whole thing is about getting to heaven, and in order to get to heaven, you need to gain points in your lives through good actions. And there's a classic example. They say, well, if 200 years ago I gave roses to my wife, I got plus 20 points. If I now buy roses and give them to my wife, I get minus 100 points. You know why?
No.
Because of because these roses are not natural anymore. They are grown using pesticides, child labor, polluting and everything. So actually, in the last 10 years, nobody has got to heaven. That's the statistics. Oh, what does it tell us? Okay, we can do a lot.
I like what you're saying.
But I think it's about also what we are talking is about knowing, being informed, demanding for precise information. The other day I bought a drink, it said dragon fruit yazoo, and now I started to drink, and then I looked, there's 0.04% of dragon fruit and 0.01% of that yazoo. Most of the rest is raisin juice. There's nothing about raisin juice on that etiquette, nothing, just in small letters there. And this is exactly that, maybe our societies have to do more about just simply, I think our choices when we buy products are there, and this is the first thing which we can do in our daily lives, just to make choices. But then again, I don't know if I get minus 100 or plus 20 points in the end because I'm not informed enough.
I don't know. I'm not the one who counts, so I cannot tell you. But I wonder if what you were trying to say is that we also shouldn't go to the extremes. Like we should still be sensible about it. and not just change everything at once. So if I can please follow with the question of what do you do in your lives, because we only heard from one of the speakers. I wonder what else do you do? Maybe you have an idea.
Well, we are quite circular household, actually. I just realized I didn't even think that this is something that is something special, but we do, because my wife is already many years on maternity leave, so she has a lot of time to look for sources where to buy second-hand things and when to sell second-hand things. We do a lot of repairing at home. And actually, we even made reusable diapers ourselves. So we had an overlock and everything, and we were sewing, and these were sustaining 3 kids. So, but for us, it was something natural, because when I moved to Finland many years ago, the whole society was like that.
Yeah, it's true, and so we're getting back to the roots. Maybe when you had a problem, a technical problem, maybe you would kind of search for people who know how to do that. But also, I guess maybe with YouTube, your wife would just look for the answers, watch tutorials, and kind of learn how to repair something.
And it feels also nice because you can create some value.
Yeah,
you just don't throw it away.
Yeah, that's very important. And I've heard that one of our guests, who happens to be behind the camera, would like to ask a question. So, if you don't mind, I'll just quickly go there. Okay, and I've just heard that we have another question. So, if somebody could please just follow with the microphone.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Ad Vaas. I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm practicing some things on circular economy. I want to put some pepper in the conversation and shake some trees. What I didn't hear from you is a fundamental change in economic thinking. I heard something about predictability. Well, in nature, nothing is predictable. Nevertheless, there is an order. I heard something about plastic and solving the plastic problem. In my opinion, that's not about circular economy. It's making linear economy less bad. And could you please reflect on that?
We appreciate it. Well, I guess the question was kind of addressed to me, but first and foremost addressed to you, dear guests.
It was hard to hear.
I don't know.
It was hard to hear.
Predictability, it was probably me who was saying it. I didn't mean predictability of the nature. I mean predictability of the actions that we are going to take. And that's very important. This answers one of these questions hanging over there. Because if we want to convince people investing in something that is now more expensive, we need to have predictable future. What will the society or the regulatory framework look like in the future? And then we can start convincing them on the basis of the future, not on the present. So I think that was not meant for the nature. It was meant for the actions that we do.
But our guest, I guess, is trying to say that some of the steps that we're proposing are maybe just not enough, and that the plastic problem is just maybe not the most pressing issue. Is that what you're trying to say? I guess we should hear a little bit more from you to make sure.
Well, I'm not saying that addressing the plastic problem is bad. I think it's a very good thing. But to say that this is one of the best examples or one of the good examples of circular economy, then I have some question marks. So please keep going on this path of solving the plastic problem. But we really need to design our behavior, our industry, and other things in order to be regenerative or distributive and creating a circular economy.
Would you want more actions taken on the personal level of every citizen, or would you want governmental design, maybe?
Well, we need to rethink, redesign our policies, our industry, our behavior, our economy. So that's really fundamental.
I fully agree with you. In fact, we have a fascinating debate about in the UN system about a new model of consumption, green economy, and how to encourage the companies to simply to follow what let's say we are proposing. And in addition to the private sector, we also have other players like local municipalities, like cities, for instance. I can show you an example from Poland. Before we are calling it in my office shame therapy. So we are planning to implement this shame therapy into various mayors to show them what is possible and what kind of steps and ambitious policies other mayors are implementing, and they simply can do the same. The only thing is if they are brave enough. And of course, the other element of this discussion, how to encourage them to be brave enough. Of course, for that process, we need society. When society is simply voting, let's put it that way, properly, so simply politicians knows that they are more, let's say, green-oriented, they are starting to implement more ambitious policies. So that's the biggest role the biggest simply work we have to do. We all together we have to do. And if you are asking what we can do more, we can educate our friends, neighbors, our kids, and we should start to read with them ambitious books and ambitious reports and watching ambitious movies. Not like, not less ambitious, So it's our personal choice. Yeah? So it's simply every one of you could make this type of choice and decide starting from today that one book per month you are reading together with your children and your friends, and you're later discussing it. That's the power of the network of people, and of course that network of people has an impact for policy-making process. Politicians are reactive. Sorry, Mr. Minister, but we know how it works, huh?
Well, I believe that some of us may just have a feeling that more should be done, and that the decisions and the steps should be more dramatic. More, there should be a complete shift in policy. Is that what you say? Yeah. And you agree, from what I can see. So
sorry, but I forgot about the example. So before the climate summit, we had our internal target to include under Nazca platform. It's a UN cities simply which are working for climate policies. Simply to encourage Polish cities to join that initiative. That initiative is under UNFCCC, so-called UN Climate Agency, and our internal goal was to have 50 Polish cities under that platform. Now we have 103. That's a great achievement. And now we are focusing our efforts on these 103 mayors, and we are using this shame therapy to encourage them for really ambitious actions. And please keep your finger crossed, because we are doing it here in Poland, but of course we are following by other Nazca platforms members. We have 9,300 cities around the globe. And the UN system is trying to integrate all these efforts with all these mayors to have the other layer of action. Governments and simply states, local municipalities, and below the most important factor, the most important element, society, all of us.
Okay. Thank you for that. We just have 5 more minutes to go, and I wanted to hear from the gentleman who has his mic ready, and I wonder what the question is.
Hello.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, my name is Frederick Campbell. I'm coming from Sweden, and it's very, very pleasing to hear that you took up the question about increasing awareness of the citizens. It's often forgotten. But what I wanted to point out is that whilst a lot of efforts have been made to reduce pollution, both from agricultural and also from plastic into the oceans, hardly anything has been done, particularly transnational, about landfills. landfills, the older landfills in particular, often contain organic degradable material, which creates methane and also leachant, which leaks into the groundwater and which comes into the sea. There's a very, very big disparity between the countries in the Baltic Sea region, particularly if you take from Russia and the Baltic states, who still use a lot of landfill, whereas in Scandinavia and Germany, it's probably maximum 3% goes to landfill, and it's only building and construction material. So what is being done about reducing pollution from the landfills through capping or lining of the landfills, which is very, very easy to do?
Yeah, thank you for that. Maybe this also is a question about what could be done when it comes to landfills at the European Baltic level. Tell me more.
One thing is that we will not fund it anymore under structural funds, that's for sure.
That for sure.
Unless the Council and Parliament decides otherwise. We do propose not to fund any more new landfills, and we do have a lot of earmarking, a lot of funding available for areas which need to be completely reconstructed. You know, we've done in the Baltics the old Soviet ports which were, polluted heavily. We've financed partially reconstruction of these areas and building them into something which is, like a really modern suburban area. It takes a lot of investment, all I can say, to shift, but at least I think we are on the right track that for future, we don't want new landfills, we want at least some funds. I don't know if DG Environment thinks even more, but certainly there's something we will pay particular attention. I think it's relevant in the Baltic Sea area, you're right. But I don't know, for example, whether our big neighbor Russia will follow the same approach. They still have access to Baltic Sea, no? In two places.
Yeah, but it always is a good idea to kind of start with yourself. Like sometimes if you want change, then people say, be the change that you want to see in the world. So like I guess the Baltic Sea countries of the European Union could do more.
Exactly, and again, yesterday we had this dialogue between CEOs, and the discussion was about chemical fertilizers. So that's exactly what you have in mind: how to prepare the products which are very innovative and very friendly, simply especially for the Baltic Sea. Especially for the Baltic Sea pollution related to eutrophisation, chemical fertilizers are the biggest challenge. How to reduce the level of damage we have from that source. And here, innovative chemistry could be helpful. And we had a discussion about that, what kind of innovations in laboratories we could get from companies like BASF but BASF is the best example, at least at that point. And some examples also from laboratories in our state-owned, let's say, company, and here from Poland, Grupa Azoty Group. For instance, that company invented intelligent chemical fertilizer, which is simply works that way that when we are putting it on the ground, it's starting to analyze the chemical construct of the ground, and is simply starting to work very, very, very slowly. With the quality of the ground is good, so very, very quickly. When the ground is in the bad shape, simply is it depends on simply need of the ground structure.
I understand. So it will try to fit in
exactly
to the.
And this type of innovations are very interesting for us, also in the context of UN public procurement scheme, because if we will use better product for, let's say, Africa, especially in the context of global challenges related to hunger, like in Yemen, we are in a good process, and we somehow have to feed people, and the number is growing. Based on UN Population Fund, we will have 11 billion in 2100, and we have to find a solution somehow to feed all this group number of people in a relatively soon. And this type of discussion about chemical fertilizers are, I think, one of the most important from our perspective.
And then I will come back to the report of Politica Insight, because they actually write that every single growth has to have an end. And they actually mentioned the year 2100, which to them is well, maybe it's not a prediction, it's just a symbolic year when they say that countries that are developing these days very fast may not be able to always have the same level of growth every single year, because actually the number of resources that Earth has for us is limited. And I guess the reason why we actually meet here is to appreciate it, but also to acknowledge that there are limits to what we have on the planet, and that we actually need to take actions to make sure that we respect the Earth. So thank you very much for your kind words, for your remarks. We started with social inclusion that you mentioned, that should be part of the new rules, that everybody should be part of it. And it really is important that the whole region makes sure that everybody is listened to. We would have to take actions on different levels, and ordinary people should be part of it. The action plan should be quite focused and very specific, and there should be some tools to actually incentivize companies to act better. I wanted to thank you so very much. And I just have this feeling that maybe Mr. Marcin Ociepa could have like this very final word, because you maybe haven't had so many chances to speak before. So maybe on a last note, if you could just...
Yeah, thank you. I agree with our guests. You say that we should rethink and redesign our policies and our behaviors. And we saw the question about, can we show the questions from the
we'll
audience?
try to come back to it, but
how to convince the business, how to encourage private business stakeholders to invest in sustainability, make it profitable. We should think about green policy, start think about green policy as not a problem, not even a challenge, but as an advantage of Europe, of Baltic Sea, but whole Europe. Then, if we will make it profitable, the Russia and the other countries will follow Europe, follow us. And this is the best wishes for all of us here.
Yeah, we agree. Thank you so very much for this. I would like to thank the speakers, Mr. Normundus Poppens, Mr. Kari Herlevi, Mr. Petr Hradil, Mr. Marcin Ociepa, and Mr. Kamil Wyszkowski. It was our pleasure.
Thank you.